I want to start with you, Jeff. How serious do you think the threat for retaliation is for America's tech companies and tech executives?
I think the possibility is quite high, actually, and I'm a little bit fearful that we are at a tipping point in terms of the trade war. Up until now, China has responded to American actions by retaliating in fairly measured ways. But this is a fairly aggressive measure that has unfortunate timing, and I fear that that may tip the Chinese over into getting into much more aggressive kinds of retaliation. And every American firm that does business in China is vulnerable because Chinese laws are extremely vague. There is no way to get official clarification, and so people, in order to do business, have to work in that murky regulatory environment. And the Chinese can crack down quite easily because those laws are vague, and they can interpret them however they want.
I'm sure that you heard Elon Mui's commenting of Josh Bolton's knowledge ahead of time that the arrest was happening and going into the trade talks. Does this cast negotiations on the U.S. part in a somewhat more doubtful light, whether they can go in and be honest operators and trade talks with China?
That fact alone is very suspicious. However, there's a much longer story here. This case dates back at least to 2011. When the Commerce Department was investigating ZTE, it found a ZTE memo that outlined export control violations by a company that is clearly Huawei. In 2016, the Commerce Department subpoenaed Huawei in relation to export violations with regard to Iran. So these charges, or this case, doesn't come to as a surprise to Huawei or the Chinese government or anyone. And I think there's a lot more to the story that we yet don't know.
Okay, so if we take John Bolton at his words that they knew ahead of time, Jim, let's talk a little bit about what the United States needs to see from China at this point and when we're going to see details about Huawei's CFO.
Well,
right.
we still don't have...
Go ahead, Jim.
Right. So it looks like this is going to end up, in the Eastern District, and obviously it's unclear, what those next steps are. As far as the negotiations, listen, China's sort of on its back foot. It seems to me that they knew about this, days ago, and yet still made very positive rumblings about we need to come to an agreement and we're going to follow through. So, I mean, I would expect there would still be some sort of agreement, that this won't derail that agreement. But that's going to be a short-term agreement. This won't be the last incident, this isn't going to be the last incident on China's part, probably, retaliating against American companies. So if investors don't like this, they don't like the idea that this isn't going to get solved with a big deal on sorghum or soybeans, well, hang on, it's going to be a bumpy ride, because there's certainly people in the United States government who will be very happy to see a sort of a disentangling of the Chinese and American tech ecosystems, and this is certainly one step in that direction.
So, Jeff, what do you expect China's next move will be with respect to the CFO of Huawei? Will they put pressure on Canada not to extradite her? Number two, would they potentially find some charge on which to pull in some American executive who is working in China or in transit through there?
I would imagine that they're almost certainly talking to the top of the Canadian government about not extraditing this executive. And if the extradition actually happens, I think retaliation is highly likely. And Chinese past practice is to retaliate in a similar kind of way. And as I said before, I think a lot of American companies are vulnerable for no fault of their own. And the Chinese would be able to retaliate if they choose to do so. However, up until now, the Chinese goal in the trade war has been to maintain the status quo. If they retaliate in that way, then things will start getting out of control, and reaching an agreement that will settle the trade dispute will be much harder.
It's also important to notice that we've heard some conciliatory comments coming out of the Commerce Department in China, that they've said they're going to start these meetings on intellectual property and opening the markets there. We have to wait and see how some of this shakes out. Jim Pethokoukis from AEI and Jeff Moon from China Moon Strategies. Gentlemen, thank you for that.